Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. We are digging into the digital revolution, what it means, where it's headed, where it's going, how we got here in some ways, and some of the tools that people are using to try to move forward into these crazy days of the digital economy and everything changing awfully fast. Our guest today is John Foley, who's the creator of the Cloud Database Report, longtime follower of the database market, and a great journalist covering this field and a good friend of mine for quite some time. John, welcome. Glad to have you on Cloud Wars Live.
Hey, Bob. Thank you. It's good to be back. It's spring here in the New York area. And Bob, I got back to the gym a few days ago. So really looking forward to where we go from here.
All right. And as where you're going with that, John, any triathlons in your future?
Well, still trying to plan out the summer months here, get my legs underneath me, so to speak. So let's talk about that on the next one, maybe.
Okay. All right. I'm giving you dodge it there, John. I'll probably come back at you unfairly on that a little bit later. But John, so many things going on. First, just to set the stage, I think lots of people know you, but for those who are seeing you for the first time, John, give us a little quick overview of the Cloud Database Report and just sort of touch on some of the highlights of what you're thinking about with that these days.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Bob. And just to remind people that we launched the Cloud Database Report in February. So we're just a couple of months into this. The Cloud Database Report is what it sounds like. It's really focused on the cloud database market. My background, of course, is as a technology journalist and analyst. I've been in the database market for more than 20 years. I worked at Oracle and IBM and MongoDB. And so, there's so much going on here. This is what the Cloud Database Report is all about. We have a newsletter, and I would encourage people to sign up. They can get the subscription form on the Cloud Wars website. And, since we talked about this on the last podcast, Bob, I've talked or had briefings with Oracle, Google Cloud, SAP, Cockroach Labs, InterSystems, Pinecone, Fauna, and just tomorrow I have a conversation with DataStax. So, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on, and I think we're going to get into a bit of that here.
John, you mentioned Google Cloud, that you've talked with them, and certainly AWS is always a force in anything having to do with data, databases, infrastructure, things like that. You've got some interesting takes on what those two giants in the field are doing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I want to work that into the conversation here, but why don't we just start with AWS? They had their database modernization week recently, several days of briefings. AWS talked about data volume growth, and it's really interesting. They said that data volumes are growing 10 times every 5 years. All right, so Bob, this is a favorite subject of mine, is the amount of data. It's really a one-way street here. It just keeps growing and growing, from terabytes to petabytes, to exabytes and zettabytes. IDC forecasts now global data is in the zettabyte range this year, and it looks like 60 to 80 zettabytes. So this is about scale, elasticity. It's about data environments and being able to manage all of this. And so, the state of the art and science just keeps improving and getting better, but the nature of the challenge just keeps growing.
Yeah. And John, it sounds like it's one of those things that's going to feed each other as businesses get more of these tools that allow them to do more with data and make more use of it and make it a mainstream business tool rather than something that only a few sort of high priests are able to give access to. Then that's going to spur the tech companies to keep cranking out bigger and better tools. As you said, the state of the art will improve. So it seems like there'll be this, back and forth push here. And it's hard to imagine, a point at which, the business customers say, that's it. I've got all the data capabilities I need here.
No, that's not going to happen. You know, I'm sure we'll talk about Snowflake here, but that's one of the things that Snowflake brings to the table, right? Is ease of use and making data available to more people within the business. Now, so data volume, AWS mentions that's growing. Then, kind of uh, tangential to that, but related. Google Cloud mentioned on their kind of a wrap up for Q1 that they now have 7.5 million customers. But what was interesting to me is there's been a 3x increase in the number of cloud customers they have with contract values of $250 million. And they now have several customers contracts in excess of $1 billion. So, this, I don't think it's coincidental that more data is moving into the cloud. The databases are growing and the contract values are growing. This came up on Snowflake's last quarterly earnings call as well, where Frank Slootman noted that they had a dozen customers with 12-month trailing revenue of $5 million. And Slootman made the point that as the deal sizes get bigger, that it becomes a CEO level conversation, right? So it's not just an IT or developer conversation anymore. It really is a business conversation. And Slootman said that it requires industry context and it's an outcome oriented conversation. So, you start with growing data volume, but very quickly it becomes like the business discussion.
John, I thought it was interesting. You bring that up because Slootman, he's been around. He gets this sort of thing. He drove ServiceNow through some of its high growth years. So I think he's really planting the seeds here, right? And I thought it was fascinating in that Q1 earnings call or Q4 earnings call for them that he made the distinction. He said, look, we love CIOs. We always will. He said very often their focus is on IT modernization. And he said, we can do that. It's a wonderful thing. But the higher level conversations, John, as you point out, he said, rising up to the CEO level, where he's talking about how do we become an entirely different sort of business and the business transformation driven by this broader, deeper, richer access to data. And so, John, I think, as you know, we recently added Snowflake onto the Cloud Wars top 10. And even though its revenue and the total volume of sales for the company right now is, way, way, way below any of the others, it just seems they're forcing a lot of the big companies whose names you've mentioned, as well as some others, they're forcing them to rethink, it seems, how they bring these data oriented, whether it's a database, a data lake, data access, data migration, all of those things. They're forcing the bigger companies to reimagine how they articulate the value of that to customers. Does that seem fair to you?
Oh, Bob, for sure. Can I give an example of that? So I think about Snowflake, and not everyone will love this comparison, but like the Robin Hood of cloud databases. Okay. So you get the idea, right? Like, so Robin Hood is known in the world of finance and stock trading for its innovation and ease of use. Things got a little complicated there recently, but I mean, that's how they made their way into the space. Innovation, ease of use. Now, this is what Snowflake is doing as well. So it wasn't coincidental that Oracle a few weeks ago announced that the latest update to the Oracle Autonomous Data Warehouse, one of their primary use cases is for what they call citizen data scientists. So what this means is that they're trying to take data engineering and data science out of the role of specialists and make it more widespread within businesses. And so there's a much larger group of employees who would fit that description as a citizen data scientist. They're, they understand how to work with data and how to pull data sets together. And so Oracle now, with their latest update, is targeting that group of users. And I think Snowflake is doing the same thing, which is just putting data into the hands of more people and making it more usable. And so, when a CEO hears about that, they see the business implications. And so this gets back to your point, Bob, which is that Snowflake is kind of becoming a forcing function in the world of cloud databases and data management.
John, to go from a small disruptive company to a large disruptive company, from Snowflake to AWS, you mentioned a few minutes ago about what was it there? Was it Database Migration Week? Or
So AWS had a database modernization week,
modernization?
but
Sorry.
you're right that migration is really becoming a central part of the conversation, because so this is how cloud databases are built. You have to get the data into the cloud, right? And one of the things I'd like to talk about here is that is more can be more complicated than it sounds. The working headline I have for this little conversation here is: will your next database migration project be 1 click or 1 year? Right? Because you hear both. You hear about 1 click data migration tools. Make it very easy, something that can happen in an hour or a few hours. But then when you really get into it and you start talking to people about these database migration projects, they tend to be weeks or months, or in some cases even years. And that was one of the things that came up at AWS, is they had migrated their own 7,500 of their own databases from Oracle's database software to AWS's own databases. And that was a 2-year undertaking. So that kind of gives you an idea, these, you can move a data set or a single database maybe in a few days. But when you're talking about an overall, what's sometimes called the data estate, a whole collection of databases that kind of span the enterprise, you can easily be talking a couple of years worth of work.
John, since we've touched on Snowflake here some, I want to come back to, again, their most recent earnings call. And one of the things that their Slootman, the CEO, touched on a little, but the CFO dug into this pretty good, where he said, we can get a customer all signed up, but he said, our revenue is based on consumption. So say we get somebody signed up January 1st, we don't really start to get to the consumption part until July, because he said there's often a 6-month data migration project there. And he said, we can certainly help with that, but until they get everything, as you've just described, John, up and into the cloud, in this case, the Snowflake data cloud, he said the meter doesn't come on for the revenue for Snowflake until then. So even this disruptor coming in with some of the best tools and purpose built to do these sorts of migrations, it's at least 6 months. So John, these time frames, right? We'd all like to snap our fingers, and we've got all the advantages of the great new technology, but as you've described, this is a long, hard process.
Well, so let's stick with the example you just gave, Bob, because I also listened to that call with Frank Slootman, and I thought there were some really interesting takeaways there. So, as you said, 6 months or longer for a database migration, they said. Also, the way that they described these migrations, the terms that they used were they're lengthy, expensive, risky, and Frank Slootman said customers are leery of them. That's one side of the story. I guess you could say that's kind of like the heavy lift. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Now, Google Cloud recently announced a database migration service that it described as a 1-click experience. Okay, so this is the other side. This is kind of like the ease of use. Now, how can we be having a conversation about data migration? On the one hand, it's one click and takes a few hours. On the other hand, it's 6+ months, and it's it's lengthy, expensive, and risky. So there are a bunch of variables or factors that can come in here. One is uh, if you're moving a database in what's called a homogeneous environment, or same to same, right? So if you're moving an Oracle database on premises to an Oracle database in the cloud, that's an easier migration. If you're switching platforms at the same time that you're going from on premises to the cloud, it gets more complicated. And then, of course, there's this whole discussion of workloads. Is it structured, semi-structured, unstructured? The size of the data set, the applications that surround it, and the tools that are used for it.
Hey, John, that's a great point. I want to come back to that in a second. But first, a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/A game.
I had an interesting conversation with Teradata SVP Ashish Yannick recently, and we talked about this. And he made the point that data migration may take from 1 to 4 days. Okay, if you're just talking a single database, moving from on premises to the cloud. But he said that a workload migration may take 1 to 4 months. Okay, so the data migration may take 1 to 4 days. The workload migration may take 1 to 4 months, and the overall estate moving that may take 24 to 36 months. So I think that the CIOs that are maybe listening to us, they're aware of this, right? But I think more broadly, as more people get into the discussion of data management in the cloud, they need to keep that in mind, that one click experience does apply to the simplest scenarios. But in enterprise IT, things can get deeper and more complicated quickly.
So, John, that as you were describing that and the different language that's used to describe these different functions that are going on, these different steps in the overall transition, I thought of, I remember, for some time talking to CIOs, they were their biggest, what'd you call it? Not their biggest enemy, but close to their biggest enemy in the world were on airplanes, the in-flight magazines, because they'd always say, oh yeah, my boss was on, an airplane. He saw in one of these, backseat magazines, a real light article about technology, said, oh, you can do this just by doing, A, B, and C. And then, the CEO would come back to the CIO and throw this article on their desk, said, hey, they said you can do it in 48 hours. Why can't you do this? So perhaps, John, there's some, CEOs or business leaders are coming to the CIO and saying, hey, I read you can do this, 1 click, 1 hour, we're all done. Why are you telling me this is going to take 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, well, look, I don't want to be unfair to a Google Cloud team for talking about the one-click experience, because it's true. You can do that in 1 click. If you see the Google Cloud's most recent database migration service is really for 2 platforms right now, MySQL and Postgres. And then later they will have a Microsoft SQL Server. And then, you could kind of anticipate that Oracle might come after that. So if it's like to like database migration, if it's a relatively small database, then that's an easier project to handle. But yeah, as we've been saying, it gets more complicated. And I do want to talk about that, because these large databases, I mean, it's incredible to think about how you get data into these clouds. So, Bob, we've all heard about Snowflake. Um, now, what about Snowball and Snowcone and Snowmobile? Um, Now, those are products that AWS announced. Andy Jassy actually announced a few years ago. And those are tools that AWS makes available for data migration. So let me start with Snowmobile, which is my favorite. So Snowmobile is an 18-wheeler. It's a container, like a tractor trailer, 18 wheels that they back up to your data center and upload 100 petabytes at a time. So, and then this tractor trailer drives over to the Amazon data center and unloads the data. It takes 2 weeks, okay, for 100 petabytes. Now, it's pretty amazing, right? To think that we're using 18 wheelers going down the road with, with kind of like a security vehicle trailing to get your data from point A to point B.
So John, this is in this container you mentioned, we are not talking in the Kubernetes category, right? This is a big metal box on a 18-wheeler.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I was reading some reviews about how this platform works, and generally they're positive. People like it. But one of the, concerns was a flat tire. So, this is the world of, very large databases. And Andy Jassy said that there's a surprising number of customers in the world that actually have exabyte databases. So let's say you have an exabyte database, which is 1,000 petabytes, and the Snowmobile can handle 100 at a time. So you have 10 trips to move an exabyte, right? 10 back and forth trips to move that much data. And interestingly, if you do the math there, 10 times 2 weeks is 20 weeks. That's actually less time than Frank Slootman was saying it takes to move data in a 6-month project. So big data sets, big challenge in moving this data. Now, but just think about this. So AWS also has Snowball and Snowcone, which are smaller footprint ways to move data. Now, the Snowcone, they describe as something that you can put in a backpack or even carry by drone. All right. So these are, you don't really think about this when you're thinking about data migration, right? Putting your data into the backpack and marching it, across the mountain trail and over to the data center. So data migration is fascinating. And it's something that, that everyone needs to think about as they, come up with these strategies for cloud databases.
So John, we've all probably at one point or another had an external hard drive in our backpack. So that doesn't seem so foreign, but you're saying that part of the Snowcone service is you get a hard drive and, attach it to a drone and send it by drone. That's part of the service?
Well, no, that's AWS doesn't provide the drone transportation. They're saying that that the Snowcone is of a size, it's about 4.5 pounds, it's less than 5 pounds, that it can be carried in a backpack or by drone,
Okay.
depending on what the user does. Because a lot of the vendors now have strategies for these edge solutions, right? You have data. It could be maritime. It could be out on a ship. Yeah. It could be, military out in the field. So you have data in faraway places, and then you need to get that data into your cloud data center.
Okay. John, sorry, I wasn't trying to kid around there or anything, but when you mentioned that, the 18 wheelers and some people are doing that, I thought that, for the right sized package, the drones, things that we thought not so long ago, well, that's absurd. That'll never happen. But then it does happen. And
You can easily
yeah.
imagine that being a real service. Yes.
And the way that certain technologies are evolving, somebody might said, it's faster and safer than, these trips in the 18 wheelers where a flat tire is certainly possible. So now, John, that's wild. That is wild. We talk about bigger and bigger pipes, 5G, they'll be able to handle it. It'll change everything. But still, there are times when the old ways of doing stuff, like an 18 wheeler, is the right way to go. And it sounds also, John, like what you're part of what you're describing here is there's going to be a lot of companies that, for whatever reason, whether it's security, regulatory issues, data sovereignty issues, they're going to keep a lot of stuff in their on-premises systems.
Well, right. And that is the world of hybrid clouds, right? So this this issue of architecture and planning how to get from the world of on-premises data centers to cloud databases means that hybrid clouds will be the answer for many businesses for years. And this is why we see so much activity around hybrid clouds. Teradata made the point in our conversation that hybrid databases de-risk data migration. So, you can kind of go at your own pace. You can have backup strategies. And so we're seeing, virtually all of the vendors, including the cloud native vendors, with hybrid strategies. Google Cloud has Anthos, AWS has its own hybrid solutions. Really, all of the vendors do. IBM is a company that is probably making one of the biggest bets and biggest plays in hybrid cloud, both with their Red Hat acquisition, and then also, with just this week they announced the spinoff of Global Technology Services, which is newly called Kyndryl, and Kyndryl is all about managing IT infrastructure. And so I haven't talked to IBM about this, but I think it seems obvious that that is also part of a hybrid solution.
Mm-hmm. John, you had some thoughts too about this, the fact that IBM spun out this part of the business and that it isn't some, sort of oddball collection of things. This is a Kyndryl is a massive organization right now, pointing to the fact that IBM thinks there's going to be tons of work in the on-premises world for some time to come.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so I think it's an open question as to how much of Kyndryl's work is a public cloud and how much private cloud or on-premises cloud environments. I'm sure that it's some of both. But Kyndryl is 90,000 employees, and a $19 billion business. It hasn't been, officially spun out from IBM just yet. They're preparing to do that sometime this year. But I think it does speak to this world of enterprise technology, and that it's not as simple as just, turning everything over to a public cloud vendor. The biggest companies with the most mission critical applications, many of them will continue to run these hybrid environments.
Yeah. So, John, a minute ago too, you had talked about with some of your ongoing work at Cloud Database Report, and you mentioned a list of the companies you've spoken with. Some are very, very well-known companies, or you see lots and lots about them, whether it's a small but high-growth company like Snowflake to AWS, Oracle, SAP, some of the others you mentioned. But there's also a handful in there that you mentioned that are not so well known. And I wonder if can you just take a minute and touch on a couple of the interesting things you've learned from some companies, whether that's Cockroach, Pinecone, or some of the other less well-known cloud database vendors.
Sure, Bob. And I think that at some point here, we may want to just carve out a whole podcast just to
Yeah.
talk about kind of the newcomers into the cloud database market. One of the companies I talked to is Fauna. And Fauna makes, like they have an underlying database, but they don't talk about that. They talk about the API, a data API. And see, that gets back to a point that you and I have talked about before, which is that in some respects, the data platform, the database platform and the data environment really rise up, more quickly than just focusing on relational databases or NoSQL databases. And Fauna is an example of that. It really speaks more to simplifying the development experience, to working against the database. Snowflake, they're very well known, but they don't really talk about the underlying databases, a database that they use either. It's a data environment. So you see this, in many different flavors. InterSystems is a company that is been around for years. I think InterSystems has been around for 40 years, but they're part of the conversation as well. They really grew out of the hospital and medical industry, so they have deep expertise there, and proven technologies, and they're expanding into new spaces as well. And one of the things I talked to them about was this concept of a data fabric. So they're very good at being able to pull in data from many different sources. And once again, this becomes critical because it's generally not the case that in the world of data, you're going just from point A to point B. You may have thousands or millions of data inputs and sources. This is the world of IoT and edge computing. So the data fabric and expertise in that and working with data from many sources becomes really very valuable.
John, it's fascinating, right? As the digital economy unfolds and every company wants to become a data-driven company, they can have these aspirations and goals, but somehow they've got to build these foundations that you're describing here to be able to do that. And how would you sort of rate the progress, John, of where you see things coming along here?
Well, so it's really interesting to watch how the pieces are coming together. So one of the other key developments over the last few weeks has been that Databricks and Google Cloud formally announced, that the Databricks technology will run on Google Cloud. This is something they indicated that they were going to do, and the formal announcement was made. Now, Databricks is available on Google, on Microsoft Azure, and on AWS. So this, what are the benefits of that? Well, so it's increased integration means lower complexity in a world of data science and data engineering. And this is just another proof point in what we've been talking about with these data platforms and database platforms. And you can say that some of these companies are going to compete with each other, but more important than that is the way that the underlying technologies are coming together in an integrated fashion. So I think it really makes the decisions easier as to how to build modern data management environments. You can actually, you don't have to choose whether to go with Google or Microsoft or AWS or another public cloud vendor. You can use them all. Multi-cloud hybrid and data platforms are really the direction things are going, and they are coming together very quickly, I would say.
All right. Well, John, before we wrap up, is there any final points you wanted to make?
Well, let's see, Bob. I would say that uh, if I talk to you in a month or a few months, we can still talk about the growing data volumes, right? As I said before, it's a one-way street. So I'm always on the lookout for these petabyte and exabyte scenarios because, as I've said before, the world of data tends to be one that advances exponentially, 10x, 100x, 1000x. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the next iterations of the data platforms. And I would just invite all of your listeners, Bob, to reach out and let me know what's going on in your part of the world, either as a database platform provider or as a user, because we're just really would like to invite everyone to be part of the conversation.
How does somebody reach you, John?
Well, so I can be found most easily on the Cloud Wars website. My contact info is there, and you can subscribe to the Cloud Database Report there. And my email address is jfoley09@gmail. So anyone should feel free to email me directly.
All right, John. Well, thank you. Always a pleasure to hear from you. And my head's still spinning a little bit about the, the database migration via 18-wheelers and perhaps even drones.
Yeah, I know that that's my favorite stuff to talk about, Bob. So you haven't heard the last of the 18-wheeler stories. As I say, that's where the rubber hits the road when it comes to data migration.
John, well said. Thanks very much, John.
Okay, take care, Bob. Thank you.
All right. And folks, thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. We hope that, there's perhaps an 18-wheeler in your future, a drone, who knows? And John, very likely next month, will have some additional insights for us in the latest things going on here with cloud databases and the crazy world of data management. Thanks for being with us. See you soon.